First of all, Debbie Paris, my mother-in-law, I want to thank you for joining us for this Facebook Live discussion. Everybody, I am so lucky to have Debbie as my mother-in-law. She is a child psychoanalyst here in Shaker Heights, has actually been for 45 years, which is incredible. And I have the I actually have the privilege of getting to live in this community. And I mean, parents come up to me all the time and tell me what a difference you've made in their lives.
Oh, well,
and as a mom, that's a pretty incredible thing to get to hear, like on a really regular basis. So I'm really happy to get to have this conversation with you, Debbie, and to share it with so many other women who are moms across the state of Ohio and really thinking about, oh my gosh, what do we say to our kids? And thank you for doing this remotely. You know, we're trying to, I know it's really hard to stay away from your grandkids and we miss having you over here, but it feels like the smart thing to do right now.
Well, we're all having to adjust, and not all the adjustments are comfortable, to say the least. I would love to be over there. Not that I wouldn't like to see you, but I'd love to see the kids.
Oh, I know. We know where the priorities lie when it comes to right. So here we are. A national emergency has now been declared across the state of Ohio. Schools are closed starting Monday for 3 weeks. That's K through 12 public schools, but as you know, we have a son in preschool and that has been closed as well. And parents, I think, are dealing with a lot of logistics but also just wondering, you know, with kids coming home from school like now, in the last couple of hours probably, no matter how old they are, because there's everything from preschool kids all the way up through kids in college whose classes have been canceled coming home as well. So I guess my first question for you is, how should we be thinking about all of this as parents?
Well, I want to respond to that by framing it by also, how does it feel to be the parents right now? You know, we have an awful lot coming in at all of us that we don't understand, that's alarming everybody to varying degrees. And the degree to which we want to help our children is the degree to which we want to provide for them what they can use and hear in a productive and healthy and way that's on the trajectory of mastery. And that's hard when we're feeling like, what are we supposed to do? How are we going to do this? So I think our first job is to sort of shrink it down to a manageable size if we can. I was telling Katie before, the metaphor that I come up with is when you wake up in the morning and your pupils are enlarged, all the light comes in at you and it's too much light. You can't see anything. And then your pupils have to adjust. So I think we need to close our lens a little bit for ourselves in the service of helping our children have the lens be what it should be for them. So the first thing we need to do is certainly educate ourselves about what the realities are, and then think, what do we do to make this okay for the children? And in general, we're going to filter this through the different developmental stages of kids, because a 3-year-old isn't the same as a 6-year-old, isn't the same as an 8-year-old, isn't the same as a 16-year-old. I think what we want to understand is that the younger the child, the more concrete the thinking is, and the more we want to speak to something that will make them feel safe. That's actually true all along the way. We all want to feel safe at the same time as being realistic. So would you like me to talk about different developmental stages in general, or do we want some specific questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have gotten a lot of questions when we announced we were doing this. I got questions on Facebook, a lot actually via text. So I think addressing, because women who are in this group do have children of all ages, I think sort of going through it would be helpful. So with young children, I think sometimes the impulse is to say, you know, if you have a 1 or 2 or 3-year-old, well, gosh, thank God they're too young to remember all this, you know, and I don't even need to worry about them. But I know you might have a perspective on that.
I might be able to frame that a little bit differently. You know, we tend, because we don't remember those years, we tend to think, oh, experience isn't important or doesn't matter or isn't being taken in. More it's that it isn't being taken in. And the fact of the matter is, young children are very vigilant. They're very much taking in everything, but they're taking it in through not fully developed brains. So they take it in wrong. So much of what we do with young children is try to fit the experience to what they're capable of understanding that they are observing things. They're observing our faces. They're hearing our phone conversations. They're seeing when people are upset. They are seeing when people are confused. And they certainly notice when the structure of their day changes. So what we want to do, first of all, is provide, and this is probably true for the kids all the way through up till teenagers, we want to provide structure because that makes the world predictable for them. That's actually helpful for all of us because right now the world is feeling very unpredictable. So we want to build into our own little microcosms what is predictable in our day. So for young children, the patterns that they're used to, how they get up, how they have breakfast, when they get dressed, when they're allowed to watch TV, when they're not allowed to watch TV, when, whatever it is, makes a big difference. In terms of what they're hearing, we need to be very aware that they're hearing everything. That doesn't mean they're understanding it, but they're hearing it and taking it in according to their own distortions. When kids are verbal, when they're able to talk, we are able to talk to them some about what's going on. Right now, everybody's staying inside because it's a good time to stay inside and stay healthy. One of the questions you said, how do do we say you have to wash your hands? Do you have to wash your hands? Well, we're not really trying to increase their anxiety. When they're 4 and 5, we can say, there's a sickness going around and we need to wash our hands to keep ourselves healthy. They can buy into that. 2 and 3, not so much. Right. So that's where we keep wipes around and we wipe their hands. So I think that those sort of practical measures shrink it down to size for all of us. I think that they will, if they have older siblings, they are going to hear more. And what we want to do is be two things. We want to be filters and we want to be translators. If somebody speaks Spanish, you don't explain everything in English. So we want to explain to the under 5 child in one way and then the over 5 child in a different way, because that's when brain development and understanding and cognition is more familiar to us post 5.
So post 5, we are going to share a little bit more, but what is TMI? Too much information. Like, how much do you believe?
I always feel, and this is true in regular development when bad things aren't happening too, I think you always start with what do they know? What have they heard? What are their questions? Because then we're responding to what they're thinking about, opposed to just handing off information. In any realm with children, just handing off information doesn't get you any place. They can probably quote it back, but it isn't getting integrated or understood. So if you start, particularly the kids that are coming home from elementary school or from, and that school is canceled, what have you heard about why school is canceled? What do you understand? What have other kids said? Big thing. Because there's a lot of playground talk that's very distorted. It's like playing telephone. It gets bigger and bigger or smaller and smaller as it gets translated. So that what we are doing in that realm is correcting for misinformation and distortion rather than handing off information. When we get to the handing off information point, again, what do they need to know? What can we offer them that helps them feel like they're being included and that there's something for them to understand at the same time that we're not swamping the mechanism, not giving them so much information that they're either panicked or totally shut down. So I would say in a very concrete way, what they all know is that there's a virus out there, all the elementary, and that it's being shut down. What we want them to feel is that this is being productive rather than non-productive, because that's actually true. What they're trying to do is contain this, and we're doing our part. They want everybody to stay at home so a lot of people don't get sick. And this is, and that works. And I think the idea that it's effective is a very important thing for us all to remember, but certainly for the children to know. The other piece of this, in a general way, and this is for all the developmental stages, is to think about it that in terms of sort of being passive versus being active. None of us like to feel stuck. None of us like to feel like we're helpless. We can't do anything. So we're looking for places for us to feel active and for the kids to feel active. That brings us back to the hand washing. Gee, one of the things you can do is wash your hands. that's a good way of keeping yourself safe and drinking your juice and good place to get broccoli in. But, we can contextualize it for them. Does that make sense, Katie?
I like the idea of motivating the hand washing and good hygiene and stuff right now as a way that they can take responsibility and do their part, and
make themselves feel safe. Because when children are scared, let's do this as a generalized thing, and this is true for all stages of development, but the younger they are, the more so. The first thing is they worry about themselves, and then they worry about the people they love a lot. And what we want to be is reassuring about themselves and the people they love a lot, which is mommy and daddy. It starts with the kid and mom and dad. Then it might go to siblings, and then it might go to grandparents, but they need to know they're going to be okay. And we don't have to describe the odds. First of all, the good news is this is not harming children to the degree that it would make us frantic. Very good news, very important. But we really don't want them to be terrified in any way. So one of the things we filter out is information that they can do nothing about, that would just scare them and is not pertinent to their daily life. Kids are narcissistic in a very healthy way. They're the center of their own story. Right. So we want to help them understand what their story is at this moment. Okay.
Can we talk about grandparents? Because, you guys are a big part of our lives. And, in a few days, they're going to really start to notice you guys not being around as much, and just how do we maybe proactively communicate why we are.
Well, so the why that we might not communicate to them is, the mortality rate is higher for the demographic. I'm laughing because both my sons called and said, Mom, we don't want to offend you, but you're in that demographic. Yeah. But what we do want to say is, well, we're very protective of people, and grandparents, we don't want them to get sick. And they don't want to get you sick. So everybody's staying in their own houses. I think it's that small. You can keep it small. And the other thing I want to say is, as I'm saying it, and I said before, they read our faces, they see how anxious we are or not anxious. We want to be reassuring, and we want to feel reassured. So if you're going to feel extremely anxious, and we all will at different times, find your places, but not with your kids. And we do not want them to pick up from us a feeling of uncontrolled anxiety. We want them to pick up from us, you're safe, it's okay. And the job of mom and dads is to make children feel safe and be protected. And we're going to do that, because that's the other thing. We do want them, Katie, you're right. We want them to be able to wash their hands, but we also want them to know that, hey, this is on mom and dad. We got it. We can take care of it.
Yeah. And knowing that we all do have our own anxieties, it probably makes sense to think about, okay, I'm going to talk about this with my spouse or whichever friend or whoever, and kind of use that outlet, and then go, have a different sort of conversation with my kids. But what about if your kids are older? And I don't know if there's a different, where you would draw the line, middle school, high school. And then of course there's many kids whose college classes have been canceled. They're coming home.
Parents. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe that's two different categories.
Well, yes, except let's do a more general thing, an older kid, which is sort of late elementary school on up. They've heard a lot. They have the cognitive ability to take in things. That doesn't mean that they have no feelings about it. And it doesn't mean that they always get it right, because for all of us, anxiety will distort how we hear things. That it just is true for all of us. But again, I'd say the same principle advice of, what are they saying? What are you hearing? What are you worried about? I think teenagers are very worried. It's interesting. At different ages, kids have different worries about contamination. Now, this is stirring everybody's worry about contamination and how do you keep safe. I think, again, even with teenagers, we want them to be very reassured that this is not the demographic they're most worried about. We're just trying to do this so this illness doesn't spread. They might, just have a cold, but we don't want to get somebody else sick with that. But also they're going to have questions about the community response and the government response, particularly once you get to the high school age kids, because that's what they're studying. That's what they're learning about. Yeah. And whatever our politics are, and we all are on this thing because our politics are very similar in terms of what we want from the people that are running our country and our government to feel that there's somebody in charge. What we want to say is the medical people are very much on top of this and working on this. You know, Mr. Rogers always said in a calamity, find the person who's the helper.
Yeah,
you know, is that great?
Yeah.
So, you know, here we can talk about the medical people being the helping people and that they're working on it and they're getting it and they're taking care of people.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably very helpful for the teenage group to shrink it down to that lens rather than the big global world lens.
Yeah.
And you know, the kids are going to have access. The kids that have access to research on the computer are going to see the worldwide spread, the so on and so forth. What we can say, and it is true, there are lessons to be learned from what's happened to date, and we are trying to learn those lessons to apply it.
Yeah.
So again, making it feel like something positive can be happening in this. The college is another thing. Yeah.
You mentioned the computer and, you know, older kids, of course, with access to social media, a lot of news 24/7 through many, many channels.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any advice for, you know, is it important to regulate that intake in different ways these days?
It's a complicated question because with the isolation that the kids are going to have, social media at the moment is actually an important connectivity piece for them. Mm-hmm. You know, the self-regulatory part of social media is what we all struggle with as adults and with kids. But right now, we want kids to feel connected. On the other hand, we don't want them getting swamped with information that overwhelms them. I tend to think, particularly with teenagers, we always do better to do things with them rather than to them. So you open up a dialogue about it, about what are they going to be hearing? What are they seeing? Let's talk about things. Let's look at some things on media together, you know, and have it be a dialogue that way. I think the top down, you know, you're not allowed to do this. You can't do this. A, you ain't going to win. And B, it forestalls a conversation that could happen that could be a good conversation. So now is probably not the time to say, no, you can't talk to your friends now. You know, I think the teenagers really need it. And even more, the kids that are home from college need it.
Yeah. Okay. So those kids home from college, that's got to be a shock to the system, probably on both sides, you know, for the parents, maybe the empty nest to not, and then for kids who've been having their independence and now, you know, that loss of control. I mean, what should they expect? Any tips?
Well, you nailed it, because again, you know, I maybe should have started with this. Everything we say to children, we are trying to think of what is their developmental phase. You know, what can they understand? What do they need to feel safe? What are they working on? You know, the elementary school kids are working on the world just feeling like an okay place and that they have mastery in the world. But the adolescent is working on developing a self-definition and independence. So the pull of coming home is complicated, not just for the kids, but for the parents. Everybody there's a regressive pull. All of a sudden, your kid who's been independent, you have to set the rules. And all of a sudden, the kid who is independent saying, I can stay up till 3 a.m. drinking. You know, there's just a push me, pull you thing that's going on there. I think that the kids coming home, we need to have that dialogue with them about what this feels like. This isn't what they want. This is so incredibly disappointing to kids. I really feel for the kids that are seniors that, you know, nobody wanted this to happen. Right. And I think voicing a negative feeling is always useful in terms of then getting to the positive. If you try to deny it, it's okay. You know, you got to get the job and you got to do this. It bypasses something and it will close things down rather than open things up. I think for the college kids, they do have coursework to do and online things, but that even feels different in terms of the relationship to their classmates and their professors. So acknowledging how different it is and then managing it within that is great. The expectation thing, I think, is the hard part for the college age kids. Do you set up curfews? Well, they can't be out. I mean, we've got, you know, we actually have a self-limiting thing there. But I think it's to say we need to have some reasonable parameters that work for you as an independent person that is back living in a community of a family. And it's disappointing to you, but we need to work out what works. So it's a dialogue and an ongoing one.
Yeah, it makes me think too about other limits, and this applies to all ages. And this is true even without all the craziness going on, that when it comes to, I can see the screen time issue like being a major source of stress, maybe for all ages. But I know, you know, with younger kids, we're trying to hit that balance, you know. But we as parents, and especially juggling so much and maybe not having school and childcare, the temptation is going to be just to, okay, one movie after another, that kind of thing.
Right.
And, you know, should we feel really guilty about that? How much is too much? How do we balance? How do we talk about that with our kids to maybe get a hold of it?
I'm going to go back to where we started, which is it's helpful for the children to have a structure for the day. It's also helpful for us as parents. It manages our own expectations. Look, I think some screen time is reasonable and realistic, and you know, we're all trying not to lose our minds with this. Yeah. And yet kids like activities. They like, you know, doing some things, and whether that's having a time where you're building things or playing games, or they're doing FaceTime with a friend, you know, and showing them everybody's drawing together and showing what they drew, whether it's
what's that idea?
Yeah, you know, there's that an art project, go to Katie. She's the best. You know, I think that the sort of making it a community thing rather than just tune out on one hand. On the other hand, and there are going to be other experts that disagree with me, I think right now everybody needs some tuning out. Not in a pathological way, but in a healthy maintenance way. You can't be 24/7. And kids can't be 24/7 interactive with their environment. They need some time to have it calm down and slow down.
I feel like I could use that too. We should all use this advice for ourselves as well.
Yeah, absolutely. This is for adults as well. Yeah. I think with kids, you can know when it's too much, when too much of anything, whether it's excitement or, you know, wildness or screen time, when they can't stop. And, you know, kids have a hard time transitioning. So you say you got 5 more minutes, or, you know, you're going to need to stop when this is over. You prepare them. You don't just snatch it away. But it's like if kids are running around, you know, that can be fine. But if you say, you know what, everybody needs to calm down, and they don't listen, you know, it's going to end with somebody getting hurt. Inevitably. Somebody's going to fall down. Somebody's going to cry. So we try to cut in before it's the too much and out of control, but give some latitude. I also think, just for a parent right now, this is both a marathon and a sprint. This is not going to go on forever, but it's going to go on long enough that we need coping mechanisms to help us. You know, you know, that's always the metaphor of the oxygen first for you and then the kids. Yeah, I don't exactly mean it that way. I sort of mean it that we want to structure this so we're not inventing the wheel every minute. It's too exhausting. And we want to structure it so that you have some partnership among yourselves and it's not so isolated.
Yeah. I think that this question, Sarah says, I'm having difficulty figuring out how I'm going to provide structure for my kids while balancing teaching my classes online, which is exactly the thing I know that you've been talking about with my brother-in-law and sister-in-law.
Yes.
The other side of the family are, so any advice? Just a lot of people are doing that because everybody's teleworking.
Well, and I think, right. I mean, everybody's going to be working from home. It's one thing if you have set up working from home as your career path. That's what you do. You have it set up. But for many of you, it's like all of a sudden your two worlds are colliding where you've been able to keep them more separate. So I don't know that I have brilliant ideas about it, but what I do think is, for kids, what I mean by structure is not even necessarily doing the same thing at the same time, though that is helpful. It's preparing them for what's going to happen. And so if you have to work for 2 straight hours and no kids, you need to prepare them for those 2 hours and say, this is what you can do in those 2 hours. Let's set it up. Let's plan it. you know, and have some check-in time or whatever, so that you're preparing them for what's going to happen. And then the other thing that's really helpful is to prepare them how it's going to feel. It's going to be hard for you when mommy's working. You're going to want to be, you know, and listen, for very young children, it's hard to do this. You know, elementary school age, you can do it. Under 5, it's harder because they don't always manage their impulses as well. They're too
right.
So you sort of want to prepare yourself for that and what you're going to do when they interrupt a teleconferencing thing that you've been planning for months. But I think the feeling part of, you know, you don't like it when mommy's on the phone when you need her, and that's very hard, and mommy understands that, and you can tell me that it made you mad, or you can draw a picture, or you can write, you know, to give them some outlet for it that's appropriate actually will shrink it down, hopefully.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Okay, so another question is, what are signs that children are having mental strain regarding the outbreak or being stuck at home? Just the kind of, what do we need to watch for?
Okay, particularly all children, but particularly with very young children, you always look at behavior because behavior has meaning. With young children, behavior is really a communication. So can I tell a story about my grandson actually in this line?
Hey, go ahead.
I was over there babysitting for the last time for a while, apparently, and he was having a hard time listening, and he's a great kid. And I finally said, "You're having a hard time listening. Are you upset about something?" And he stopped. And I said, "Are you missing somebody?" His father was out of town. And he said, "I am missing Daddy." And I will tell you, he totally calmed down after that. And that was labeling the feeling and understanding that the behavior, which it felt oppositional, it felt, you know, but it was really communicating a feeling. So we can use that if children's behavior is extreme or changed. Where do we look in young children? Is their sleep pattern different? Is their eating different? Is their self-care different? Are there more meltdowns, more tears, more fights? MAD covers lots of feelings. So when kids are upset about other things, they'll often look mad. You can actually take that all the way through development. It'll show in different ways. But the general rule of thumb, which you've probably all heard, is you do look for a change in patterns and behavior. I think we can assume that the teenage kids are going to feel stressed in a way that we understand more, some of it about the virus, but more of it, I think, is about what's happened to their lives.
Right.
You know, because their lives we're talking about disruption in our lives where we have adult perspectives on it. Their whole life is their peers in school. So that disruption is really, really tough. The other thing I want to say is having a hard feeling is not the same as being totally overwhelmed. You know, we're all going to have hard feelings about this. I think a kid that's totally overwhelmed, you will see it and know it. You'll feel it. And it'll either be that they get very, very quiet or very, very the opposite. Because it's at the extremes that you know that a kid is really, really struggling. In the middle, there's a lot of normal stress that we want to help them with. One other thing I want to say about the behavior having meaning, when show and tell in kindergarten, well, we're trying to translate from show to tell with all the kids all the time. And once you can put language to something, it shapes it. It makes it much more manageable. So that's what we're going to do with the degree of stress each kid is feeling.
You know, I think the message is sometimes the impulse can be, if we want to switch from that show to tell and naming it, it can feel scary and like, are we going to make it worse? You know, or maybe I just need to go and talk to my spouse about this and figure out how we're going to deal with it, you know, as opposed to just doing it with the, you know, with our children and not being afraid. I think we worry sometimes we're going to pick at the wound or something.
Right. Well, here's my metaphor for that. Because it is an ironic thing that addressing the negative makes the positive. So you're walking down the street when we're allowed to, and you're having a very bad day, and you bump into a friend, and you say, "Oh my God, I have to work all my work. I have to move work at home. My kids are going to be home from school. I don't know what to do." And your friend says, "You can do it. You're great. We know you can do it." And then you walk down the street, and you bump into another friend, and you say the same thing. and they say, oh my God, this is so hard. Let's go have a cup of coffee together. Who do you want to be with? And who helps more?
Coffee, please.
Coffee, please. So I think there's empathy in naming the feeling. You know, people say, well, are you putting a feeling into the kid's head? If only I could do that, I'd be the best therapist in the whole world. I've never, if you say something and it's not really what's going on with them, it doesn't stick. It's like, boom, you know, it doesn't go in. It's when you hit it, you can feel it. So it's
we
not
don't have to worry about putting some negative idea in their head that wasn't there. They're just gonna.
Yeah, it's just gonna go by them. Boom. So I think that it doesn't make a feeling bigger to name it. It makes the feeling smaller.
Okay.
Okay.
Got it. Okay, I've got several more questions here I want to get to if we can. What if you hear other parents just answering questions or dealing with this in just, I don't know, weird ways? You're on the playground, maybe it's in transition times of, you know, drop-offs or whatever, childcare transitions that may be happening right now. I mean, my inclination is always just sort of to ignore and move on, but
I don't think we can interfere with how other parents are doing it, but we do want to register whether our children are hearing it. Mm-hmm. And then we say, did you hear so-and-so's mom talking? Did you hear what she said? What did you hear? What did you think she was saying? Again, it's that same thing of vetting them for how they took it in, what they heard, and then correcting the misinformation or containing the anxiety. That you know, listen, every parent's going to do this according to who they are as a person, but also how anxious they are. And those levels of anxiety on each parent is going to be different, sort of according to their circumstances. People with parents that are compromised are going to be more anxious than, you know, people who aren't. So, but I think children hear everything. People like to say, oh, they didn't hear or they didn't know. They are hyper vigilant, particularly when there's a change in circumstance and when parents are anxious. So you want to know that they're picking up these things and then talk about it with them.
And I think that idea can either make us feel really nervous, like, oh my gosh, every single thing I say, you know, and I'm going to do damage and I'll never be able to undo it. But instead, I think what you're saying, I'm trying to look at it more as, you know, the opportunity for communication.
Okay, I'm glad you brought it up. No, it doesn't have to be every single thing. In general, when you're at home, it's an aura more than every little thing that happens.
Oh, okay.
But when they hear something on TV, or they hear a parent doing something, or they see something, we don't want to pretend they haven't seen it. But in terms of what they're taking in at home, hey, they're taking in who we are at home all the time. You know, but if you recognize that you're really anxious and you see your kid getting wound up, talk about it.
Yeah. Okay. This whole notion of social distancing, I think, is new to all of us. I find it to be just a very depressing term. It is. It's sad. You know, creating distance between people. I like to form connection with people in my life. How do we explain kind of like, I don't know if we should use that term or not, you know, but like, how do we explain what it is and why we're doing it?
Yeah, it's a bad descriptor. We're talking about physical distancing. We're not talking about communication distancing. Okay? We're not talking about social disruption in terms of how we relate to people like this. We're talking about we need to keep physical distance. And I think that is so important for us as adults in this, that we want to find our communities that we can go through this with, whether that's a best friend and a spouse and a sister and a mother and a father, or whether it's the preschool parents, or, you know, that you're sort of staying in touch. I know they're talking about staying in touch with people to keep them safe and check on them, but that's great. But I'm talking about something else here. I'm talking about peopling our lives. We can still people our lives. We just have to do it differently. So I think the social distancing, I hadn't actually thought about until you asked the question, Katie. It's a terrible descriptor.
It just makes me feel so cold and alone inside.
Yeah, no, we're physically distant, okay? Right. But that doesn't have to, listen, those of you that have relatives or friends that live out of town, we're not socially distant from them just because we're physically distant.
Right.
There you go.
I mean, and I'd never done a Facebook Live with you before today, and now we've had a new experience together.
Yes, you've had the new experience of my being technologically challenged beyond belief, and you've been very patient.
You got it all worked out. Okay, Debbie, what have I not asked you that parents out there just need to know? Your advice is always so practical. I always walk away kind of feeling like, okay, I got this. I'm a little less overwhelmed. And so thank you for making me feel that way. But
good. I hope I did.
You know, any final parting words of advice for us too?
I think my final word of advice for all of us is this is not permanent.
Yeah.
You know, I hate to make a comparison to another disaster, but, you know, Katie, you know, I've referred to this, that after 9/11, some of the response was the same, like what's happened to the world that we know.
Mm-hmm.
And what we know is, yes, the world changed some, but we also got back a lot of the world we know. This is going to happen again. And I think what we are living with right now is so much uncertainty.
Yeah.
I would say the one certainty we have is this isn't going to go on forever. So we can negotiate our littler lens, you know, figuring out not what we're going to be doing a week from now. We want to figure out what we're going to be doing at dinner and just keep it small. And that's the way to get through it.
Yeah.
Final words. I don't know if they're useful. I have a good last word that goes along with what you're saying.
Bring it on.
Anything can be talked about. Anything can be talked about. You adapt it to the right level of the kid. You adapt it to what's going on. But if you can talk about it, it's manageable. And screen time, teenagers home, kids, you know, missing preschool and their teachers, kids knocking at the door while you're trying to work. It all can be talked about, and it gives us power and it gives them power. And that really helps.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Go talk.
Keep calm and talk to your kids. That was what we named this little chat. So it sounds like that was appropriate. But Debbie, okay, well, I hope I get to see you in person sooner rather than later. Well, but if not, I'll see you on FaceTime and all those other things.
Honey, miss you all.
Miss you too. All right. Love you.
Bye. Me too.